Corey, thanks so much for sitting down.
Ben, thanks.
I've got some questions for you. You've got some questions for me.
That's right.
And we'll see where this takes us.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's going to be good.
Good.
It's going to be good.
Good, okay.
All right, cool. Question one. How did you first have the idea for Rings and Realms?
Well, deep dive analysis is kind of what I do, right?
Sure.
So, I mean, I wanted to do a follow-up show. People have been asking me about it for a long time, like my podcast listeners and stuff, and people who watch my broadcasts have been saying, what are you going to do with the show? I did an in-depth series for the Hobbit films before they came out.
Yeah.
And the concept of that was that I was discussing with my co-hosts challenges for adaptation of The Hobbit. Mm-hmm. You know, just like when, given that you're going to do this, and so we were guessing, this was before the films came out, and we actually made it into a guessing game. We called it Riddles in the Dark, because we were like, we would have, for every episode, we'd have a question. What do we think they're going to do? How do we think they're going to handle this issue? So we'd have been discussing the issue all the way through, and then we would have a specific question that people could guess, and we actually...
Were you right a bunch of the time?
I was right some of the time. But I'm actually kind of proud of how wrong I was.
Yeah.
Because I think most of the times when I was wrong, it was because the adaptation that I had in mind was kind of better than the one that came out. So, I don't know. But no, often I'm just unrealistic. But anyway, so that was kind of the focus of my discussion about the Hobbit films when they came out. I wasn't going to do that with the Rings of Power, that kind of a build-up and anticipation of it, mostly because, of course, I didn't have as clear an idea of what they were going to do and what they were going to cover, right? So that was, it would have been harder to do that.
Yeah.
But I was certainly going to be discussing it. And of course, once we saw the first episodes, we began to get a clearer sense of what was going on with the trailers that we were seeing and everything else. And of course, I had gotten a chance to talk to the showrunners and was really interested to hear where they were coming from. So once I really could tell from speaking with them how in-depth their knowledge of Tolkien was, I had decided it's definitely going to be a good idea to do a really in-depth discussion to kind of dig into what's going on in these episodes.
Nice.
Okay.
All
right. So my first question is, this Rings and Realms is a collaboration between Signum University and Studio Lab, and the collaboration is pretty much your fault, I think. So how did that happen?
Yeah. Your family and my family actually go back a little ways.
Yeah.
Your younger brother
Yep.
is a very, very good friend of mine, and we work together, and our kids are the same age, and so we've done a lot together. And I was doing a podcast with him to where I learned that my friend's brother was the Tolkien Professor.
I listened to that podcast, actually.
Did you?
I did.
I'm sorry? So I knew that Rings of Power was coming out, and you had actually helped me with a wedding. I had my sister-in-law's wedding was coming up, and they wanted some Tolkien language in there, and so he had given me your number, and we texted a few times back and forth. And then I was like, I really want to connect with Corey to maybe do something here. But I'm that weird guy who has your number, but you didn't give it to me. So I just ended up emailing you, getting you here to see if we could do something together. And yeah, it turns out there's actually quite a bit we can do together.
Yeah, definitely.
Which has been great.
Yeah.
Okay. You've been making content for years and years.
Yes.
This Rings and Realms and doing this here at a studio is a little bit different from the kind of content that you've done up to this point. Talk about how it's different.
Well, the number one thing that's different is spontaneity. I love to teach. I'm primarily a teacher in a lot of ways, especially the way that podcasting has kind of grown as a genre. I started my podcast 14 years ago. It was like not the very, very beginning of podcasting, but it was pretty close. I'm not sure there were any Tolkien podcasts before I started mine. But of course, nobody really had any idea what they were doing when they were podcasting back in 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
And so when I started, I was just not trying to it was nothing to do with the podcast genre. I was just teaching. I was a teacher. I was just teaching, right? So I was lecturing, and then I began to do more interactive stuff. And what I have always loved most, what I've always thrived most in doing is spontaneous discussion with a class, right? Being up in front of a class, to be teaching, to be responding to students, that kind of give and take. So most of what I do, which gets recorded and posted to my podcast, is not polished podcast material like most people do podcasts. It's just a class, hour and a half, 2 hour class in which I'm talking with people, I'm going through material, I'm discussing, I'm answering questions from students. And so I actually deliberately don't prep much. I'll have an idea of what I'm gonna generally, what I'm gonna talk about or what I'm gonna cover.
Yep.
Like passages from a book that I want to discuss. But I don't plan out what I'm gonna say because it's part of that fun, organic experience of teaching.
Yep.
Being here is different, right? It's a lot more planning that's involved. And I'll never forget how strange it was in the very first episodes of Rings and Realms when you asked me to do a second take. I'd never done a second take before. It's like you do the teaching moment, and it's like, wait, now I have to do the teaching moment again?
It probably wasn't even your fault. It was something,
right,
tech-wise, the camera, we got to reframe that. Or...
Exactly. That was very different. That whole thing. And so one of the things as we've gone through that's been a really kind of interesting challenge to me has been how to preserve some of. When I'm reading off a script, I'm pretty boring. Mm-hmm. At least I feel bored. It's hard. I feel like it's really stilted compared to the natural flow of teaching, that kind of, the kind of spark that happens, the chemistry that happens, with a class. And so trying to find ways in which to kind of preserve that while still operating within, the structure, being able to start when you say action and stop fewer than 2 hours later, for each segment, that's been the challenge to really kind of adapt that. So that's definitely been the hardest thing. Okay, my next question: how did you discover Tolkien?
How did I discover Tolkien? I had the book, specifically The Hobbit, I had on a list that I needed to read, just because I wanted to. I'd heard my friends talk about it. And I had, seen it in book catalogs. Oh boy, those were the days. I had seen it in catalogs, and I was like, I think I want to dig into that book. I have no idea what a hobbit is. It kind of sounds like habit, so I don't know if there's some kind of connection there. But
do you learn life lessons from this book?
I don't know. We'll see. People seem to like it, and I did have some friends growing up who were really into it, and I remember. My friend Jesse had a knife that he had named Legolas. It's just a really cool knife. And I didn't know what that meant. They had a first edition Silmarillion. I didn't know what that meant. But then first got majorly exposed to Tolkien through the films.
Yeah.
Through the Jackson films. And was at a birthday party for a friend and said we were going to see Lord of the Rings. And I was like, oh yeah, I've been meaning to see that. Sounds great. And then that was it. Mm-hmm. From then on, I was, I saw Fellowship and then said, I'll read Two Towers before the next one came out. I didn't finish. So then saw Two Towers and then said, I'll read Return of the King before the movie comes out. Didn't finish. Right. But have been through it many, many times now as a result. So yeah, love Tolkien. I think the Silmarillion is actually my favorite work. Yeah. Which has been a lot of fun. Most nights fall asleep listening to the Silmarillion.
Yeah. Martin Shaw.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Love every pronunciation is perfect.
Yeah.
Is without error. Of course. All right. What is the shortest analysis you've ever done, and did you ever honestly believe that we would get close to a 45-minute episode?
No, I never did believe that.
You strung me along.
I did let you believe that for a while because it was adorable. But I was, yes. Also, I didn't know. I was also kind of thinking, well, maybe they'll just like edit me down, you know? So I was like, who knows? But then as soon as I saw that you guys weren't really cutting my content so much, I was like, yeah, okay, I don't think that's going to happen. But what's the shortest piece of analysis I've ever done? So first of all, a brief defense. It is never possible. Like doing art, you can be brief, right? You can write a short poem.
Yeah.
You can't explain a short poem briefly. Like explanations are always much longer, right? This is why, you know, I don't know. It's a totally different art form. Like, so some people laugh about the fact, right? They'd be like, well, you know, how do you do like a whole hour-long discussion on a, you know, an 8-line poem or whatever? And I'm like, well, how could you actually explain an 8-line poem in less than, you know, that amount of time? I mean, it's you know, if you're gonna you know, dig into all of its various elements, like explaining always takes more. You know, deep dives take time. It always takes time. And I have to say, although it is true that Rings and Realms episodes are fairly long, each segment of any given Rings and Realms show would easily be a topic for a normal class of mine that I would spend an hour and a half on.
I knew we were in trouble because initially things weren't divided up into segments like that.
Yeah,
and you said, I want to do like these themes.
Yeah.
I was like, we're done.
We're done.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah. But I mean, most of my theme segments are like between 5 and 20 minutes.
Yep.
That's incredibly brief. Like, I can't even tell you how short that is.
Yeah, and it's interesting listening to you, because, I can hear people saying, like, why would that take so long? But then when you're in it and listening to you, it's like, oh, yeah, okay. You've barely scratched the surface.
Barely scratched the surface. Again, I could easily do an hour and a half class on every single segment of each episode of Rings and Realms, especially if there were discussion and answering questions and stuff. Oh, man. Yeah, absolutely. So the shortest analysis I've ever done, well, there might have been once or twice in my life when I came out with a pithy sentence, which really got to the heart of things, but that doesn't happen often. Especially since, as I say, I personally thrive best on just spontaneity and extemporaneous exchange with people. So, and that's not brief,
right?
Usually. Yeah.
No, so these guys are learning about it. You guys didn't know this was going to be like a 40-minute.
Right.
Did you?
Yeah, exactly. All right.
I'm passing it on to them. See, now I know.
Exactly. Well, I heard about the number of questions we were going to be answering. I'm like, okay, so we're here for the day. Good. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. So my next question. Rings and Realms has been volunteer in season 1.
Yeah.
How did you assemble our crew?
I picked the best people I had and put them to task. I asked them very nicely because while they are passionate and they enjoy it, it's definitely something that I'm, more into than they are. But yeah, this has been an opportunity for us to kind of have some fun, and do some tweaks and just some fun projects with the wall.
Yeah, some experimentation.
And just kind of low stakes. Have a good time with the project. We had been wanting to do something fun for a while, and we do a lot of corporate stuff here, which is great, but can get to be a lot. And so getting to do something creative,
and much more like high pressure, as you say. It's not like you're gonna try weird experiments with a major corporate client. So,
and you've been great too when it's like, okay, we're gonna try this idea. Take a break for 40 minutes while we set it up.
Yeah. It's been fun to watch, but
it's been a lot of fun. How did I assemble the team? I asked nicely. I asked very nicely.
Good.
Alrighty. Can you tell me a little bit about how you approach adaptation and how that guides your analysis? Because you're doing kind of some different things than most people. You know, it's not just a reaction or review.
Right.
You're not really saying this is good or this is bad.
Right.
You kind of take a different approach.
Yeah, well, I mean, ultimately, yeah, I'm an English professor. That's kind of how I approach it, right? So the idea is, big picture, when you're watching an adaptation, the first thing you have to do is look at what the adaptation is doing. If you're thinking first of the original, right? So like if you're watching, take Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings films, right? If you're watching the Lord of the Rings films and you just have the book in your head, you're just thinking about the book, right? And so what you're doing is constantly like cataloging differences. Oh, that's not how it happened. Oh, that's not how it happened, right? What you're doing is completely missing the story that the film is actually giving you, right? The first thing you have to do when you're watching an adaptation is appreciate, enjoy, to whatever extent that can happen, right? To perceive at least that as a work of art on its own, right? What is the film doing? What's happening there? How is that story working? How are those characters developing? Then after you have that sense of what's going on in the show, in the movie, then you compare. Then you bring it back to the original source and say, okay, comparison and contrast. What is similar, what is different, and what conclusions can we draw from that? And so that's why in Rings and Realms, I'm doing basically two different things, right? One thing that I'm doing is saying, let's look carefully at what's happening in the show. Let's look at the themes. Let's look at these recurring ideas to try to understand what is important about this, right? You know, what are the ideas? What are the larger patterns we see emerging, right? What is this as a work of art doing, right? What is it trying to tell us? What is it trying to communicate? And then, now let's go back to Tolkien and let's look at the ways in which it's, you know, do some comparison and contrast. And so that's why the other segment then of Rings and Realms is where then I'm coming in from a Tolkien perspective and saying, okay, given that we know this from Tolkien, now let's compare and contrast with what we see and bring in some of the ways in which we can see Tolkien's ideas being brought into the show, ways in which they're making other choices, right, than Tolkien did and taking it in different directions, as all adaptations do. But of course, that we can now understand better because we've tried to understand it first on its own, right? So anyway, so that's my overall approach, and it's really hard. Maggie has talked about this a lot, about how difficult it is to rid yourself of the purely emotional response to an adaptation of a beloved work, right? Sure. You know, it's really hard to detach yourself from that immediate knee-jerk, emotional investment you have in this thing that you love. And that can be really difficult. For me, what makes it easier is just getting into that mode. Again, for me, it's like English professor mode, right? Getting into that mode of looking at this as work of art, watching for patterns, seeing how, putting those things together, drawing some conclusions about how it's all working, then I can compare and contrast. And when I'm in that mode that like I'm gathering data and I'm looking at patterns in the data, which at the end of the day is what reading literature is all about, in my opinion, at least how I do it, then that also makes it easier for me to detach myself from those emotional reactions.
Cool.
Okay.
All right.
My next question, simple one.
Okay.
What is your record number for hours worked on a Rings and Realms episode in a row?
Okay, so we talked about this a little bit on like the behind the scenes video. So I will get here at 8 o'clock in the morning. We'll set up to be ready to shoot sometime usually between 1 and 4. Sometimes we don't shoot until as late as like 7.
Yeah.
So that'll go until anywhere from like 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. and then edit until...
The editing is done?
Editing is done. Yeah, which is usually like 8 or 9 the next morning. So now we're up to 24 hours. Then so that's... We try to break up the editing. So we'll kind of one of us will tap out and... Ian and Greg will come in and pick it up from there. Another few hours just to kind of finalize everything. export, upload by, 3, 4, 5 p.m. the next day. So 36 hours from the time I enter the building to the time it's up, probably 24, 28 hours straight.
In a row, yeah.
Yeah, of just like getting ready.
It's intense.
And then shooting, editing, being done. Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a
lot. So I'm glad. But then it's only 8 times or 7 because of the 2, and then we get a little break.
Yeah, a little break.
So it's a lot, but I love it. Let's see. All right, here's one. Highs and lows from the season so far.
Highs and lows. I think my single favorite episode so far was episode 4.
Okay.
Episode 6 was also, I liked episode 6 a lot, but I think episode 4 I liked even more. The Numenorian stuff was phenomenal. The wave, from the wave at the beginning to Muriel's turn at the end, that was just a powerful, beautiful storyline in that. Loved what was going on with the Harfoots as well. That was the festival with the Harfoots also, and it was both very emotional, the revelation of those that they have lost. It was the Left Behind stuff that upset a lot of people, but I really like the Left Behind stuff. I mean, people want to think about happy, peaceful hobbits, right? But they're not in the happy, peaceful place yet. These are hobbits that are really struggling to survive in a hard world. And I love that they're showing that. I mean, I think that's a really, really interesting thing to depict. So when you're a weak, sort of nomadic people, you've got to make hard choices. They can't afford to have the whole tribe die.
Right.
And if they stay in place in the wrong season with no food and predators coming in, they'll all die. Like it's hard. Anyway, but so I've been shocked at how much I have loved the Harfoots in this show.
I was pleasantly surprised with them as well.
Yeah, I did not expect that. I was not a fan after the trailers. Like, it looked weird, and I was not. But yeah, I've been a big fan. So I think episode 4 was the highest point for me. There's no question what the lowest point was for me, and that was the mithril stuff in episode 5, which just kept coming. And for me, it's funny because my thought when I'm watching something in the moment is never really, do I love this or do I not love this? The first thing I'm always thinking of is what it's going to be like to talk about this for the next week, right?
And you knew,
and I knew as soon as that Song of the Roots of the Hithyglir thing showed up on screen, it was all I could do, because I was on camera during our watch party, so I didn't do this, but it was all I could do to keep from just like putting my head in my hands and being like, this is gonna, the week that is lying ahead of me, like I could feel it closing in, how many times I'm gonna have to, oh my goodness. Yeah, I'm like, this is my life for the next 7 days, is trying to talk about this and explain this. So yes, that was, my heart sank in episode 5, knowing the work that was going to be lying ahead of me in that week.
Oh man. I love it.
Yeah.
One other question. There is a fly that has been flying around here. Now, there he is. You have a technique.
I do. It's tricky, though. They have to cooperate. He has to land.
Okay, you said it was to come down.
The clapping technique, that's right. Come down. You got to get about an inch above him and then clap together. You get him?
Got him.
Dude!
I heard him pause and clap, too.
There you go.
I think we'll end it there. Yeah.
That's pretty good.
That's it.